Yeah, exactly. We thought it'd be great to sit down with you and take the opportunity to just pick your brain a bit on the topic of AI, especially, and maybe get to know a little bit more about why you've decided to jump aboard as an advisor to OptNet. So I think the most obvious question for you is why is AI seen as being important in the future of telecom service providers? I think we should start there, probably.
Probably the place to start is probably AI can be applied in lots of different places within the telecommunication networks, but the critical pinch points at the moment is the network itself, surprisingly enough. Over time, the complexity of the network has increased and increased and increased. We've seen a massive change in telecommunications networks. 30 years ago, the focus of telecommunications networks was voice. Voice was the leading service. Data was a tiny thing.
Yeah.
I can remember in AT&T deploying some very slow speed modems, which was seen as state of the art, that people were doing data transmission at 300 bits per second.
Yeah,
today
lightning fast.
data, absolutely. Today, the world's changed, and data has outpaced enormously voice. Voice is a tiny thing, and data is now massive. The internet's come, things have really changed, and telecommunication infrastructure has had to change accordingly to these types of new services, and not just in scale, because they've had to adopt new technologies to allow the network to have more flexibility, more capability to be able to react to different types of data flows and services that now exist, far more complex service mixes than they were a few years ago, where voice was the critical thing and data was little. Now there's all these other things, video conferencing like we're doing now, and various other things. And in that new world of a much more complex network infrastructure, the sort of systems themselves, the abilities to control all the different systems, has sort of outpaced the operational capability. And what's really driven that is the move to virtualization. Virtualization, a technique where you can create virtual computers, software computers, running different applications rather than have a one physical computer per application.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And the deployment of that so that it can move into things like the actual components of the network, the routers, the firewalls, all the different components of the network being virtualized as well, has tremendously driven up the operational complexity. And the need for something that is able to deal with that usually complex network and make decisions in a very short period of time, to alleviate all sorts of different things, and we can talk about those, is really a critical imperative now for the industry.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, a question of scale, and then, as you said, the need to be able to make operational and meaningful decisions based on kind of a real-time evolution of things across the network. And perhaps, in case you want to touch on that as well, what do you think about this idea of the autonomous network that's really being talked about a lot, I think, these days?
Yeah, all the telcos are talking about that at the moment. That's the new buzzword,
Yeah.
The route to an autonomous network, when we actually get there. Certainly we want to bring a lot of autonomy to the network infrastructure, the ability for it to do a lot of things automatically. We still want to have a human in control of it. It's more like, how far do we go with a self-drive car, and I kind of love all the things in my car that help me drive at the moment. They're wonderful,
But you're not sure.
Do I really want to switch the whole thing off and sit there?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not sure yet. I mean, well, maybe one day. Maybe one day I might be confident enough. Yeah. And the telcos, right? And telcos are thinking exactly the same. We'd love an autonomous network where everything works. It's all automatic. Hang on now. Well, maybe we don't want to let this network get out of control. And so, yeah, same problem. So they're thinking logically like that. And in that thinking, as they go through it, they say, well, what can we do to make this, to add intelligence to the network, to bring it up to the next level of intelligence, so it can do a lot of things itself, and we can build in some of the human knowledge into the network. And now things happen very fast in networks. Denial of service attacks happen very, very quickly. They're very complex. This is where people attack the network infrastructure in order to particularly bring down the network or bring down particular access points in the network. Faults occur, very complex faults in the network, and slowly grow, and they can spawn throughout the whole network. We talked, a while ago about the fact that around about 1.5%, it was a figure that we looked at, of the revenue of operators actually spent in dealing with outages. You know, it's a very considerable amount of revenue, and it has a huge effect on customer experience.
Yeah, of
course,
course, yeah.
Churn, loss. How can they improve this? How can they? And in a more complex network, this is just going to get worse.
And I think it's also the nature of these attacks change as well, right? So as a cat and mouse game, as in the attackers will constantly change their strategies, and even, you know, the sort of more benign things that go wrong is impossible to predict how exactly or what the final straw will be to break the proverbial camel's back. But I think that's also something that they need to learn to cope with, just the evolving landscape itself, as complexity increases, as the different ways attackers can exploit their networks evolve as well. That's something that needs to be kind of flexible, their approach to adapting to that.
You can see the change. If you look, you know, a few years ago, I've worked in network security for quite a long time. And a few years ago, it was all about pattern matching, you know, because things were kind of predictable. This particular virus looked like this. If you saw this pattern, you know, predictable, you know, then, you know, and we had to keep on loading more and more patterns. We had so many patterns, we couldn't search them all. We got so many false positives because so many patterns overlapped, and we ended up with, and eventually you couldn't do it anymore. This pattern matching worked for a while. Yeah, and then, you know, like you're saying, Mohan, we moved to more a heuristics type of approach to security. We looked at the behavior of the network infrastructure, what it actually did, right? But analyzing behavior in real time of a network with thousands and thousands of virtual components and flows and all the rest of it, and actually spotting in that sort of rat's nest of stuff, that haystack, the
needles, right?
What's actually happening? The needles, really difficult. And so machine learning, which is able to look at patterns, and what you asked me a question earlier on, I think, you know, why did you come on board to OptNet? I love the pattern matching that you've got, you know, the way you've been doing that. The analysis, the acquisition part was really cool. And the pattern matching had some really unique intellectual property, which was very impressive. And that pattern matching, ability to do that pattern matching very quickly with real-time data in a very intelligent way, and to spot things that human beings can't spot in much quicker time, that's a unique advantage to the software.
And then I think also bringing it into a visual, kind of intuitive way for operators to interact with. That's the kind of the second stage of it, you know. So on the one hand, you have the sort of hardcore acquisition and processing side of it, but then you also need to make that intelligible for us regular humans, right? So I think that's the key balance as well.
Absolutely. I'll tell you something about that as an analogy as well. I mean, I got this new Lexus car. I bought it about a year ago now, and it's wonderful. It's got all this electronic cleverness and buttons everywhere. It's got buttons, it's got radar, it's got a head-up display. It's an amazing thing, right? It needs a rocket scientist to drive the bloody thing. My wife gets it. It's too complicated. It's too complicated. Can you make complexity simpler? You know, it's really important. I mind it because I'm an engineer. It's perfect for me, right? But you know, there's a key point there, and that is that we have to be able to present complexity to, I mentioned, the ability to actually make things simpler for the operator, not to eliminate the operator. You know, no, exactly. Not yet, perhaps. Exactly, you know, maybe at some point. You know, but not yet. We're not ready for that step yet in driving or in networks. Let's be clear. You know, and there's lots of good reasons for that, right? But making it more drivable, making the network easier to operate. Visualizations are key, right? The ability to look at some complex thing and visualize it, put it into a picture. It's that story, Mohan, about a picture says 1,000 words.
Exactly.
It says 1,000 words.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And especially in a world of millions of events per day, and I think that becomes even more so. And perhaps, you know, you've been in the industry a long time. Have you seen any sort of pitfalls or some kind of blockers that are hampering perhaps the adoption of AI and maybe in the past some other nascent technologies that emerged?
Well, the first thing is skills. You know, it's not a natural area for telecommunications engineers. We know about networks, we know about data, IT, we know about computers, but AI itself, data science and AI, it's a whole new ballgame, right? And that presents a challenge. But the other challenge it presents is this: that the current suppliers, that supply the telecommunications industry, the big guys, they're not great at it either, to be honest. They're getting better, but they're not great at it because it's not their core skill. And they've got the same issue. They've got engineers that build equipment that do this, like AI, data science, all this new stuff, pattern match, all this stuff, machine learning. It's all new. It's a new technology. It's been around a long time, but the advances in recent years have been so great that we can call it new from an innovation perspective. And when you look at that, that presents lots of issues with telcos, because telcos traditionally have been very, very, very conservative in the companies that they generally buy equipment. I think that's fair to say. They tend to go for the big guys who, lots of experience, and they've used them for years, and they're great. They produce, routers well, and there's a couple of names out there. I mean, there's 4 big companies in mobile, and there's not 40 big companies. So it's kind of very centralized. It's very centralized technology for a few different companies, and then things in the margin. But if you look at the core of what they buy, it's centralized in a very few number of companies. And I don't think that can be maintained if telcos are going to really grasp the innovation of AI. They've got to find a way to grasp the innovation of smaller companies, leaner companies who are experts in this area.
Exactly. Well, I think that's central to our strategy, at least. So we hope we see more of that going forward as well. I think you've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to discuss with you. I was wondering if there's anything else on your mind that you'd like to get across now that we have you here. Feel free.
I think I was contacted recently by a number of other very senior people in the industry who've worked for a number of years in innovation. Some of them, behind major initiatives that have really driven the industry. And they've produced a paper recently exactly on this subject of how do you get telcos to embrace innovation from smaller companies, and how do you qualify that? How do you deal with it? And they're trying to create an initiative to across the telecoms industry to address this. And I just wanted to mention that because it is becoming a major barrier for the industry at the moment, and a challenge. And I think they'll change it. And I think OptNet, is one of the companies with their great products that will be inspiring, and that people will look at seriously. But it's how do you bring that new ecosystem together is one of the big challenges that we face as an industry. And part of me coming on board was to try to address that as well, because I'd like to see great companies be successful, and I'd like to see the telecommunications industry be successful and move forward.
Exactly.
And I really think that based on my experience, in BT has been very senior levels, in AT&T, driving in some very innovative services there. Many, many years. I think this is the next big horizon for the industry, and it's one that we have to cross. It's one that we have to get to, or we're going to be left behind. And that's I'm seeing a lot of that in many areas at the moment in the industry, and we really need to grasp it. So that's my plea for the industry as well, as that I think this is very important for the future of telecommunications infrastructure and networks.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a fantastic note to end it on. So again, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Much appreciated.
Been a pleasure.